This woman's longing desire for her husband's affection turned into an attraction toward her husband's charming cousin. A very interesting movie. I bet you haven't seen it yet. Grab your popcorn and let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome to my amazing channel. Today we'll be diving into another intriguing and popular Nigerian movie. Stay tuned and don't miss out on all the fun, twists, and turns. The movie begins with a beautiful young couple married for 3 good years. Margaret, the wife, was in the living room receiving a call from her Aunt Jenny when her husband Raymond, already set for work, came downstairs. Margaret quickly ended the call, saying her aunt was bothering her about having children. Raymond jokingly replied that he would make sure she had a baby so her aunt would stop worrying. Margaret, sensing his humor, laughed and bid him goodbye as he left for the office. That night, Margaret and Raymond shared an intimate moment, but just when Raymond thought he had done his best to please his wife, Margaret showed her disappointment. She cut it short, expressing her discontent, but Raymond dismissed her feelings, saying the experience was wonderful. He turned over and went to sleep, leaving Margaret unsatisfied and disheartened. The next morning, Raymond was at the dining table having breakfast, ready to head to work, when he noticed Margaret hadn't come out of the room. Concerned, he went upstairs and found her still in bed, looking sad and worried. He asked if she was okay, and she replied with a simple yes. Still skeptical, Raymond didn't press further. He pecked her goodbye, told her he loved her, and left for work. Margaret, however, felt more heartbroken, realizing her husband was emotionally distant. Margaret, who ran a massive and classy boutique, spent the day checking the remaining stock in her store when her friend Isokin walked in. They exchanged pleasantries, and Isokin expressed amazement at how much the boutique had expanded. Margaret explained that her husband had surprisingly decided to expand her business, which delighted Isokin. They moved to Margaret's office for a more private conversation. In the office, one of Margaret's staff brought in a bouquet from her husband, which made her blush slightly. Isokin, being playful, asked how Margaret got her husband so she could get hers too. However, Margaret's smile faded when she replied that Isokin shouldn't give up on love. Isokin, sensing something was wrong, probed further. She asked if Margaret's husband satisfied her emotionally and personally, pointing out that women often face these problems when finances are not an issue. Despite Isokin's persistence, Margaret refused to open up, warning her to stop discussing her marriage. But what do you think could be the problem in her marriage, guys? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. The next day, Margaret was in the living room sorting something online when Raymond returned from work and kissed her. She shared concerns about her boutique's slow business, mentioning they were trying to boost their online presence. To her surprise, Raymond told her not to worry because his cousin, Williams, who was a marketing strategist, would be staying with them. He explained that Williams had just gotten a job in Lagos and would help with her online marketing. Margaret was shocked as she hadn't been informed about this earlier. Raymond politely apologized, saying he thought he had told her but must have imagined it. Margaret had no choice but to accept the situation as Raymond left to take work calls. That night, Raymond was still up working when Margaret came downstairs to remind him it was late. However, Raymond was so engrossed in work that he promised to join her soon. Margaret was genuinely concerned about how work had taken over her husband's life. While Raymond was financially supportive, he neglected her emotionally. But wait, guys, isn't that what people want? Financial stability? Share your answers in the comment section. Days later at the boutique, Isokin visited again and shared her heartbreaking experience with a man she had been seeing. She discovered he had 5 children and had lied about being unmarried. Devastated, she now saw all men as unreliable. Isokin advised Margaret to get whatever she wanted from her husband if he wasn't fulfilling her needs, claiming men are selfish and would do whatever they wanted without hesitation. Margaret defended her husband, saying not all men are unfaithful, but Isokin refused to stop generalizing men. The truth remains, though, not all men are the same. Just because you met the wrong person doesn't mean everyone is like him. There are still good people out there. That's what I think, guys. Later that night, Raymond returned home to find Margaret dressed attractively with glasses and holding a bottle of wine. She wanted to create sweet romantic memories, but Raymond spoiled the mood by prioritizing his work. He pleaded with her to let him take an important client call, promising to return soon. Margaret relented, but hours later, when she came back to the room, she found Raymond fast asleep. Smiling, she tried to continue where they had left off, but to her dismay, Raymond woke up and acted oblivious to her presence. Instead, he reached for his phone, asking if his assistant had followed up on work matters. Margaret was heartbroken and helpless as she went to bed, still hoping he would eventually come around. But he didn't. The next day, Williams arrived at their house, but had to wait outside because the door was locked. Margaret hurriedly opened the door, apologizing and blaming traffic. They went inside together. The following morning, the family was having breakfast when Raymond discussed Margaret's boutique with Williams. He explained what he needed Williams to do to help the business grow, adding that if Williams needed money or extra hands, he would foot the bill. Margaret blushed, and Williams gladly agreed to help with her online marketing. Margaret expressed her gratitude, visibly impressed. As they continued their meal, Williams subtly stole glances at Margaret, smiling stylishly. Wait, what do you think will happen next between Williams and his cousin's wife? I need your answers in the comment section. The next day, Williams attended his job appointment as a marketing strategist. He was one of the top 2 candidates from the interview, and their boss praised their CVs. She informed them that they would be on probation and that the one who could generate 10 million naira in revenue through marketing would be hired. She congratulated them and urged them to get to work immediately. Later that evening, after work, Williams was outside trying to catch a ride, but couldn't find any since he was still new in Lagos. Just then, a lady walked past, and Williams stopped her to ask for directions. The lady immediately recognized him as her elder brother's friend from school. Williams quickly recalled who she was, and they exchanged pleasantries with excitement. The lady asked how he had ended up leaving Abuja to work for her boss, to which Williams humorously replied, "Unemployment has a way of bringing people to unexpected places." They both laughed, reminiscing about old times before leaving together. On the way, Williams asked about her elder brother, and she sarcastically replied that he was enjoying life in London, leaving the rest of them to struggle in Nigeria. They laughed again and continued their journey. That evening, Williams returned home, and Raymond invited him to join him and Margaret on their dinner outing. Williams declined, saying he was tired. As Raymond and Margaret prepared to leave, Williams watched Margaret from afar, his eyes lingering on her waist. Things were clearly getting out of hand. The next day, Margaret faced issues logging into her website, and the person who built it was unreachable. Frustrated and confused, she sat helplessly. Williams, who was on his way out for work, noticed her distress and offered to help. Luckily, he managed to resolve the problem. Grateful, Margaret offered him a ride to his office, and she dropped him off before heading to her boutique. That night, Margaret joined Raymond in bed, only to find him fast asleep. Heartbroken and restless, she left the bedroom and went to the living room. Little did she know she was about to see something that would leave her conflicted. Williams was working out in the living room, shirtless. His broad, toned chest nearly took her breath away, but she managed to compose herself. Williams apologized for exercising in the living room, but Margaret told him it wasn't a problem. He asked if she would be okay alone, and though his physical appearance was tempting, she managed to control her emotions. Tension filled the room as Williams looked into her eyes with lingering intent before they bid each other goodnight. The next morning, Raymond was packed and ready to leave for a quick trip to Abuja to meet a client arriving from London. Margaret woke up and reminded him it was her birthday, a fact he had completely forgotten. Shocked and apologetic, Raymond promised to make it up to her. Margaret, however, insisted they go out and celebrate. But Raymond delivered the unexpected news that he had to travel immediately. Disappointed and upset, Margaret realized her husband had again failed to involve her in important decisions. Despite her pleas, Raymond left, leaving her feeling ignored and confused. Later at her boutique, Margaret received a bouquet and was overjoyed, thinking it was from her husband. That night, Margaret waited in the living room, hoping Raymond would return as promised. Instead, Williams arrived with a bottle of wine and wished her a happy birthday. It was then that she discovered the flowers were from him, leaving her both amused and impressed. However, the absence of her husband soon weighed on her again, and her mood turned sour. Feeling frustrated, she opened the wine and began drinking straight from the bottle, even sharing it with Williams. Hours later, both of them were tipsy after finishing most of the wine. Margaret began pouring out her frustration, lamenting how, for 3 years, she had felt emotionally neglected and invisible to her husband. She admitted she was starved of affection and physical touch. Williams reassured her, telling her how beautiful and breathtaking she was, adding that he saw her even if her husband didn't. The atmosphere grew heavy with tension and desire, and they ended up kissing passionately. Suddenly, Margaret regained her senses and quickly excused herself, leaving Williams frustrated and disappointed. The next day, Raymond returned home and began apologizing for not keeping his promise. However, Margaret was furious and refused to listen. She told him she was late for work and had to meet an important client, leaving him to experience a taste of his own medicine. From that night onward, Margaret began avoiding Williams, refusing to talk to him. When Williams approached her, she firmly told him to stay out of her business and assured him she was fine, leaving him worried and confused. The next day, Williams was returning from work with a colleague. While she chatted, Williams was visibly distracted and lost in thought. Concerned, she asked what was wrong, and he admitted he had a lot on his mind. Just then, his phone rang. It was Raymond. Raymond asked Williams to help pick up Margaret's car, which had broken down, and Williams gladly agreed, knowing it was an opportunity to see her. At the boutique, Margaret was scolding her friend Isoken for forgetting her birthday and not bringing any gifts. They were still talking when Williams confidently walked in, stunning Isoken with his presence. Surprised, Margaret asked why he was there, and Williams explained that Raymond had asked him to pick up the car. Margaret told him to wait until she finished with her guest. And Williams left the office, leaving Isoken impressed by his striking looks. Hours later, Margaret escorted Isoken out, and Isoken boldly flirted with Williams before leaving. Back inside, Margaret entertained Williams in her office, where he presented her with a gift pack of perfume. He then flirted with her, asking if their kiss the other night had meant nothing to her. Margaret firmly told him it meant nothing and warned him to stop buying her gifts. She insisted that he respect her as his cousin's wife. She took her car keys and dismissed him, leaving Williams disappointed. The following day, Williams had just finished meeting with a client when he bumped into Isoken, who had just come out of the spa. They exchanged pleasantries, and it turned out they were both heading in the same direction, Margaret's boutique. Isoken offered Williams a lift, and they left together. At the boutique, Margaret was shocked to see them arrive together. She asked how they had met, and Isoken explained they had run into each other on the way and decided to come together. Williams explained he had come to pick up the car key as Raymond had asked him to take the car to the mechanic again. Feeling uneasy, Margaret quickly retrieved the car key and handed it to Williams, eager for him to leave. Days later, Margaret noticed that Isoken had been chatting with Williams frequently. This left her shocked and somewhat uneasy. Concerned, she warned Isoken not to mislead Williams or toy with his feelings, as he wasn't someone to play games with. Knowing Isoken's carefree nature, Margaret was worried. Isoken sarcastically replied, "That means he won't get broken when I start playing with him," and laughed, leaving Margaret deep in thought. Why was she suddenly so protective of Williams? Was she, unknowingly, developing feelings for him? Let's find out. The next day, Margaret imagined herself and Williams sharing an intimate moment in the kitchen, until it turned out to be just a fantasy. Her suppressed emotions had now turned into uncontrolled desires, which was troubling. Later that day, Margaret decided to confront Williams about his closeness with Isoken, warning him that her friend had a reputation for being emotionally unreliable. Williams found it amusing that she showed concern for him despite previously pushing him away. In that moment, he realized Margaret had feelings for him, but was trying to fight them off. With that thought, he went upstairs. That night, Margaret waited in the living room for Williams, as he was running late. When he finally arrived, she began scolding him for staying out so long. However, Williams used his confident presence to silence her. They got lost in the moment, their emotions taking over, and started sharing an intimate kiss. Unable to resist, Williams carried her to his room for privacy. As they began to undress, ready to act on their desires, Margaret suddenly sensed that her husband, Raymond, might notice her absence. She caught herself and quickly ran out. On her way back, she stumbled upon Raymond, who had woken up and was looking for her. She lied, saying she had helped Williams to his room because he wasn't feeling well. Raymond believed her, and they both returned to their room, leaving Williams upset and heartbroken. The next morning, during breakfast, Raymond asked Williams about his marketing target of 10 million naira. Williams admitted he had only gathered 3 million so far, but was still trusting God to help him meet the deadline. Raymond offered to assist him later at the office, leaving Williams grateful. Meanwhile, as they continued their meal, Margaret and Williams kept stealing glances at each other. In the days that followed, Margaret would secretly leave her room at night to spend time with Williams. One significant day, Margaret packed her bags and told Raymond she was heading to her cousin's wedding in the East and would return in 3 days. Innocently, Raymond kissed her goodbye and wished her a safe trip. What Margaret did next was shocking. Can you believe she lied to her husband just to spend time with Williams? She had made a reservation for the two of them at a resort, covering all expenses. Williams was thrilled as they set off together. Meanwhile, Raymond visited the hospital about his worsening health. He was suffering from silent heart attacks caused by a heart condition, which the doctors were still trying to diagnose. The doctor advised Raymond to tell his wife about his condition, but he remained hesitant. While Raymond struggled alone with his health, Margaret and Williams enjoyed their private time at the resort, making joyful but morally troubling memories together. Their uncontrolled desires had taken over, leading them deeper into betrayal. 3 days later, Margaret returned home and Raymond warmly welcomed her. Williams had returned earlier to avoid raising suspicion. The two thought they were deceiving Raymond, but in reality, they were only deceiving themselves. That night, Margaret found an unusual drug in the bedroom drawer. Curious, she researched it and discovered it was for a heart condition. Shocked and scared, she immediately felt remorseful for her careless actions and began avoiding Williams. She ignored his calls and avoided speaking to him altogether. One night, Williams confronted her on the stairs, demanding to know why she had been avoiding him. Margaret tearfully begged him to end their relationship, confessing that she felt ashamed and regretful. Williams, feeling hurt, refused to let her use and discard him, reminding her that they both enjoyed being together. It wasn't until she mentioned Raymond's heart condition that Williams reconsidered and decided to leave her alone. Later that night, Margaret found Raymond taking the heart medication. She hesitantly asked about it, and he dismissed it as a treatment for stress. Though she acted as though she believed him, deep down, she was heartbroken and scared for her husband. The following day, Margaret returned home to find Williams with a female colleague who had come to deliver a file. Seeing them together, Margaret's face briefly betrayed her discomfort, though she quickly masked it. The colleague greeted her politely and left. Afterward, Margaret advised Williams to date the colleague instead of Isokin, saying she seemed decent. Williams questioned why she felt uneasy whenever he interacted with other women. Margaret denied it, insisting she loved her husband and felt terrible about their actions. Despite her words, Williams tried to sweet-talk her, leaning in to kiss her again. At that moment, Isokin suddenly entered the house to retrieve something she had forgotten and caught them in the act. Shocked, Isokin confronted them, expressing her disappointment. Margaret, panicked and regretful, begged Isokin not to tell anyone about what she had seen. Isokin promised to keep the secret, but left feeling disgusted. That evening, Margaret was restless in her room, pacing helplessly, when Williams entered. She asked him to leave, fearing Raymond might walk in, but Williams refused. He confessed his feelings for her and asked if she didn't feel the same. Little did they know that Raymond had already returned home and overheard their conversation. Raymond entered the room, stunned and heartbroken. He vented his frustration, accusing Margaret of betraying him with his own cousin. In her defense, Margaret tearfully explained that she had felt neglected, lonely, and emotionally starved. She admitted that Williams was always there, and things spiraled out of control. Raymond, overwhelmed with anger and heartbreak, suddenly collapsed from a cardiac arrest. Margaret screamed for help and rushed him to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors worked on Raymond while Margaret confronted them for keeping his condition a secret. When she asked if he would survive, the doctors gave her a grim response, leaving her devastated. In deep regret, Margaret went to Raymond's ward, tearfully begging for his forgiveness. Sadly, his heart stopped, and he passed away right before her eyes. She was inconsolable. Back home, Margaret was consumed with guilt, blaming herself for her husband's death. When Williams tried to comfort her, she lashed out at him, venting all her frustration and chasing him out of her house and her life for good. Williams left, sorrowful and broken. Months after Raymond's burial, Margaret relocated to the United States to start a new life. In the end, the story teaches us that unchecked emotions and desires can lead to devastating consequences. It is important to take full control of one's feelings and resist temptation, as giving in often leads to irreversible regrets. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe to this amazing channel and stay tuned for more interesting, captivating, and educative Nigerian movies. See you next time.